Well, thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this very, very important conversation. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. I have a few questions myself for my dear friend, Dr. Leon, who has shared with us his fascinating analysis of the potential numbers. I tend to have an alternative view of what is likely to unfold in a few days. In fact, I think that it's probably going to end up being potentially a rout on the side of the Trump forces, but we will see in a few days. So my brief comments, I'm going to uh, uh, move us to the post um, election period. Um, many people say that this election in a few days represents an extraordinary conjuncture that will lead to epoch-changing developments in the U.S. and by extension, the world. I'm not convinced. There's no question that the election, no matter which of the two main capitalist parties of the U.S. bourgeoisie wins, it will signify a step toward what I refer to as convergence politics. That is, the consolidation of a right-wing politics reflective of the overall project of the bourgeoisie as a class to preserve its rule. That is, more open and obvious fascism as a system preserving reform. For me, this process will be fully accomplished, not in 2024, but probably in a few years, definitely by the election of 2028. But the only thing that could perhaps put a brake on that or to alter it somewhat would be a challenge coming from the corrupted mainstream official opposition. We have efforts like the Block and Build, based on what I think is a discredited strategy among Democrats or progressive forces who are aligned with the Democratic Party, that Democratic administrations can be moved to the right positions. And this is something that there's no evidence that that has been effectively executed in the last few decades, but it still becomes a mantra that people who are prepared to collaborate with the neoliberal Democrats will use every election, really beginning around 1984. It also is unlikely that we are going to see a truly revived left emanating. We have to attempt to try to build that because that is the only force I think that can provide an alternative to the trajectory of politics in this country that is rapidly moving to the full consolidation of neo-fascism. So why do I take this position? Well, because uh, in terms of a material reality, neoliberal capitalist contradictions cannot be overcome. Uh, Capitalist reform is no longer available. The only capitalist reform will be fascism. And people have to remember that, unlike the popularity of these liberal notions of fascism, fueled by these uh, corrupt and backward, bad Hitler movies, fascism is a manifestation of class politics. Okay, and it can emanate from a movement similar to what we saw emerge in Europe with nationalist parties, but even more importantly, it can emanate from the top down. What we are, in fact, seeing, in my opinion, coming from the most dominant sector of capital, neoliberal finance capital, that is actively and aggressively consolidating this fascistic rule, making it very, very difficult, if almost impossible, for an effective opposition to emerge in this country. Now, this is not something that's new. I mean, this capitalist fight back, if you will, really started in the 1970s. I mean, it started in the 60s too, as we consolidated our opposition forces, particularly the Black Liberation Movement. But by the early 1970s, as our movement was being defeated militarily and politically, um, we saw that there was a consolidation on the part of the bourgeoisie, uh, partly motivated by the infamous Power Memo that basically told the bourgeoisie, if you want to preserve this thing, you better fight for it. And that, in fact, is what they did. And we saw the beginnings of that fight back and what we referred to as neoliberalism with the coup in 1973 in Chile and with the progressive move toward the right and the imposition and development of what we refer to today as neoliberalism, beginning with Jimmy Carter, consolidating under Reagan and Thatcher in the 80s, and further consolidating with the ascendancy of the Democratic Leadership Council under the right-wing Democrats, Bill Clinton, it goes on and on with the full consolidation, if you will, in my opinion, that occurred with the merging of neoconservatism and liberal interventionists under the or during the Obama administration, and the open abandonment of the Republican Party by neoliberals under or during the campaign of Hillary Clinton. So that this migration of neoliberalism that first really emerged politically in the US in the Republican Party has now consolidated itself in the right-wing neo-fascist party of the Democrats. And that is very, very important, my friends, because we've got to be able to deal with the ideological confusion around this issue of fascism and what I consider to be the diversionary politics of only focusing in on these very dangerous and fascistic tendencies represented by Trumpism, while giving a free hand to what I've been arguing for the last few years, and many people know this, that it's the neoliberal Democrats, the international finance capital dominant wing of the state that's been consolidating and driving fascistic politics in the US and globally. That, in fact, neoliberalism is the cutting edge of fascism. And we are missing the boat by just focusing in on the obvious, the obvious examples or models of this notion of fascism. So this is what we have to begin to focus. Now, look, one of the reasons why we have such a possibility of the Trump forces reemerging in the white people's house, the White House, here in 2024, it's because of this hegemony of neoliberalism with the in the Democrat Party. They had plenty of opportunities to frame their politics in a way that would have spoke to some of the concerns, the anxieties of the working classes in the U.S. But they were unable to do that because of the corruption of their politics by their donors. One quick example: the Build Back Better process, and in particular the element that was referred to as the American Families Plan, that provided some policies that could have served as a foundation for the Harris campaign here in 2024 if they would not have basically undermined themselves by abandoning some of those measures. I mean, we have already seen the bipartisan collaboration between the two parties on issues like the military budget and then climate legislation or the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. But the Democrats had an opportunity to carve out an alternative. When you had things like on the table, the permanent child tax credit that literally brought millions of children out of poverty. The proposal for paid paternal and medical leave. Resources for pre-K education, very, very important for the working class. Child care, free community college, okay? Money for housing, and removing some of the restrictive legislation that prevents people who have been convicted in this mass incarceration regime to be able to live with some measure of dignity, by having access to food benefit programs under SNAP. So They did not do this. In fact, we saw the games they played when they disconnected this legislation from their Inflation Reduction Act and uh, the infrastructure bill. When they separated that from the infrastructure bill, it was basically over with. But the progressives play games with the U.S. population, pretending that these elements will be reintroduced at a later date. This is a reality that the Democrats have to deal with. This is a reality that we have to deal with. Comment very briefly on what those realities are and how we have to move toward solving or addressing these concrete realities beyond the election. As I said, there's been consistent bipartisan agreement on the major class positions, be it the budget, military budget, and be it the current thrust toward imperialist domination. You, this, this is this is fueled by a very clear strategy that's ended up in their national security documents. That is this commitment to full spectrum domination. And they are very clear about that. And that full spectrum domination is political, economic, military, but they have decided that they're going to use the military first strategy to ensure the continuation of their global hegemony. And this is, we're not going to go into details on this, but this is reflected in the Biden war, proxy war in Ukraine. We see that they are attempting to complete the pivot to Asia. We see a more intense subversion in the Americas and on the African continent. We look at what's happening with Haiti, the expansion of AFRICOM, the undermining of the Sahel Alliance. We see the disarray now and destabilization taking place in Mozambique, this grinding, obscene war in Sudan. We know that the people in Yemen are getting prepared for an imminent invasion, perhaps on the ground, from the fascists that are in power in Israel, and the possibility of a direct attack on Iran. This is the militarization at the center of the U.S. imperialist project to try to maintain their global capitalist and white supremacy. To do that, though, you have to have another element, and that is the containment of domestic opposition. We saw this happen historically at the end of the Second Imperialist War, World War II, where the containment strategy wasn't just a military one. People make that mistake all the time. Containment had a very strong ideological component, okay? And the containment globally had to have containment domestically. And that was the foundation for the so-called McCarthyism, to basically undermine any domestic opposition to the consolidation of U.S. imperialist programs and projects. We see the same thing happening today. That basically, if you're going to have a strategy based on militarism, on war, you have to undermine any domestic opposition. And I will argue that the undermining of domestic opposition is even more intense and more dangerous than even in the early 1950s. And we see the examples of this. They are criminalizing opposition. We see what happened in Atlanta with the use of RICO to undermine and to intimidate and to criminalize opposition to Cop City in Atlanta, and by extension, the Cop City movement across the country to oppose the militarization of the police forces. The Uhuru Three, the folks don't want to talk about and are confused into believing that if you keep your head down, that basically the state is not going to come after you. Not understanding that the prosecution of the Uhuru Three was a shot across the bow. And when you all did not mobilize in response to and in support of the Uhuru Three, it has endangered all of us. Okay. Censorship. We see the massive censorship taking place, again, being driven by neoliberal Democrats, this alignment between themselves and the legacy media and big tech. The harassment that we're all facing when we go across borders today. It's all part of this process of tightening the internal repressive apparatus in this country, fundamentally of what they need. As I move now toward my closure, we've got to understand that this struggle it goes beyond the election cycles. Okay, that the short term, of course, can be for many people to express their opposition to the warmongering of the duopoly, cast their vote for Jill Stein or Claudia de la Cruz. It's really been a progressive move made by the Stein campaign and the de la Cruz campaign, calling for them to support each other in various states. Very, very important. But longer term, we've got to then understand our opposition has to be one based on more solid organization. That we have to begin to move, my friends, toward, in my opinion, more open socialist politics and building more effective class-based, but not reductionist, multinational, multiracial formations, while also recognizing the legitimate positions of colonized non-European populations to independent politics and self-determination. This must be the basis for a new radical politics in the US that is anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, committed to identifying and confronting all manifestations of white supremacist ideology and all forms of social oppression. This task is not limited to election cycles, my friends, but instead is a historic task and responsibility of all who believe in the possibility that collective humanity can build something better than this capitalist dystopia that we see in the US and in the West and in some parts of the globe. That's our task, that's our responsibility, and we've got to get to it. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.